My name is Maria, and I'm 35 years old. I never thought my life would change so much because of something that happened 6 months ago at our usual Sunday family dinner. My husband, David, and I had invited his parents over, just like we always did. Our two kids, 10-year-old Lucas and 6-year-old Lucille, loved their grandparents, especially Victoria. She always brought them sweets and gifts, giving them lots of attention. Maria, dinner is great, my father-in-law, Matthew, said with a smile. But Victoria barely touched her food. She looked pale and tired, which wasn't like her. Are you okay, Victoria? I asked. She put her fork down loudly and sighed. The truth is, I haven't been feeling well. David sat up straight, worried. What's wrong, Mom? Tears filled Victoria's eyes. I didn't want to say anything, but I went to the doctor last week. I have terminal cancer. The room went silent. The kids stopped eating, and David looked like he had just seen a ghost. But Matthew's reaction seemed strange. He looked more surprised than sad. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. I didn't want to worry you, Victoria said between sobs. But the treatment is very expensive. The doctor says I need to start right away. Of course, we'll help, David said without hesitation. Victoria wiped her tears and looked at us seriously. The treatment costs $500,000. My heart stopped. That was exactly how much our house was worth. We could take out a mortgage, David suggested. Or sell the house, Victoria said quickly. I even know someone who can buy it right away, in cash. Something about the way she said it made me uneasy. Victoria, which hospital diagnosed you? I asked carefully. Memorial Hospital, she said, avoiding eye contact. And what's your doctor's name? She hesitated for a moment. Dr. Smith. A chill ran through me. I had been a nurse for years and knew all the cancer doctors at Memorial Hospital. There was no Dr. Smith. We'll need the diagnosis papers for the insurance, I said, watching her reaction. Of course, she said quickly. Too quickly. I'll bring them tomorrow. That night, after putting the kids to bed, David looked heartbroken. We have to help her, Maria. She's my mom. I know, I said gently. But something feels off. Why didn't she tell your dad? And why does she already have a buyer for our house? It's terminal cancer. David snapped. How can you be so cold? His words hurt, but I knew he was just emotional. I decided to do some checking. The next morning, I called my cousin Robert, an oncologist at a private clinic. Victoria Reynolds? No, she's not my patient, he said. But I can see her tomorrow if you'd like. When I told David, he looked relieved. A second opinion is a good idea. But when we told Victoria, she tensed up. That's not necessary. I already have a doctor, she insisted. Robert is one of the best, I said. And it's free, he's doing us a favor. Her hands were shaking, but in the end, she agreed. The next day, Victoria arrived at the clinic with a folder full of papers. Here's everything, she said. Robert flipped through the documents, his face growing serious. Then, he set them aside and looked up at us. Mrs. Reynolds, I'd like you to take some tests, Robert said. 2 hours later, he called us into his office. Victoria looked like she was about to break down. I've checked everything, Robert said. And? David asked, gripping his mother's hand. Robert took a deep breath. The documents are fake, he said. And the tests show that you're completely healthy. Silence. Heavy, painful silence. David let go of his mother's hand like it had burned him. Fake? His voice shook. Mom, what is going on? Victoria started crying again, but this time, her tears felt different. You don't understand, she whispered. I did it for you. Robert remained calm but firm. The documents have clear mistakes, he said. I'm Maria, 35 years old. And never in my life did I think the most shocking lie would come from someone in my own family, my mother-in-law, Victoria. It all started 6 months ago at one of our usual Sunday family dinners. Every week, David and I invited his parents over, as we always had. Our kids, 10-year-old Lucas and 6-year-old Lucille, loved their grandparents, especially Victoria. She spoiled them with gifts and treats, making every visit feel special. That evening, everything felt warm and familiar as we sat around the table. Matthew, my father-in-law, took a bite of the roast I had spent hours making. Maria, this is delicious, he said with a smile. But then I noticed something strange. Victoria hadn't touched her food. She looked pale and tired, not her usual lively self. I watched her for a moment, then asked gently, Victoria, are you feeling okay? She put her fork down with a loud clatter, making everyone look at her. The truth is, she said, her voice shaking. I haven't been feeling well. David immediately sat up, his face filled with worry. What's wrong, Mom? He asked. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at her plate, and in that moment, I felt something shift in the air. "I've been hiding it," she whispered, barely audible. "But I went to the doctor last week, and they told me I have terminal cancer." The room went completely quiet. It felt like time stopped. The kids, who had been eating just a moment ago, froze mid-bite, their little hands still. David's face went pale, his shock obvious as he tried to process her words. But when I looked at Matthew, something felt off. He seemed more surprised than upset. It wasn't the reaction I expected. "Why didn't you tell me?" Matthew's voice shook with disbelief. "I didn't want to worry you," Victoria replied, wiping her eyes. "But the treatments, they're so expensive. The doctor said I need to start right away." David leaned forward without hesitation and took her hand. "Of course, we'll help with whatever you need, Mom." Victoria quickly wiped her tears and continued, her face now more serious. "The full treatment costs $500,000, she said flatly. The number hit me like a punch to the gut. It was exactly how much our house was worth. I felt a lump in my throat as I processed what she was saying. David turned to me, his eyes full of worry. "We could take out a mortgage," he suggested, his voice shaky. "Or you could sell the house," Victoria said quickly, almost too quickly. "I know someone who's interested. They'd pay in cash immediately." There was something cold in her voice that made my stomach twist. I tried to stay calm despite the growing unease. "Victoria, which hospital did you go to for your diagnosis?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "The Memorial Hospital," she answered, not looking at me. "And what's your doctor's name?" She hesitated for a second, her eyes flicking to the side before she said, "Dr. Smith." A chill ran through me. I had worked as a nurse for years and knew all the oncologists at Memorial Hospital, and there was no Dr. Smith. I kept my voice steady. "We'll need the diagnosis papers for the insurance," I said, watching her carefully. "Of course," she said quickly, almost too eager. "I'll bring them tomorrow." That night, after putting the kids to bed, I could see how crushed David was. He was pacing, lost in his thoughts. "We have to help her, Maria. She's my mom." His voice was full of emotion, his eyes begging for understanding. "I know, love," I said gently, trying to stay calm. "But something doesn't add up. Why didn't she tell your father? And why does she already have a buyer for the house?" David's face twisted in frustration. "It's terminal cancer, Maria." His voice raised, sharp with emotion. "How can you be so cold about this?" His words hurt, but I understood. He was in pain. I tried to stay calm and said softly, "I'm just trying to understand everything." The next morning, I made a few calls. My cousin Robert was an oncologist at a private clinic, and I knew he could help. "Victoria Reynolds?" Robert asked when I mentioned her name. "No, she's not one of my patients. But I can see her tomorrow if you want." Victoria sank into her chair, the weight of her actions clearly sinking in. Robert and I exchanged a look, and I could see his concern. "Maria," Robert said gently, his voice calm but firm. "I need to file an official report. What do you want to do?" Before I could answer, the door creaked open. It was Matthew, David's father. "There's no need for that," he said, sounding exhausted. His face showed deep disappointment. "I'll take care of this." "Matthew?" Victoria's voice shook with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "I followed you," he said simply. "I knew you were lying. I found the fake documents on your computer last week." "You knew?" Victoria gasped, looking horrified. "And you didn't say anything?" "I wanted to see how far you'd go," Matthew replied, shaking his head. "But this is worse than I imagined." He turned to Robert and me, his voice firm. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow," he stated. "And I'll make sure Victoria gets the psychological help she needs." "Divorce?" Victoria paled, realizing the weight of her actions. "Yes," Matthew said, his voice steady. "You've manipulated David for years, always trying to control his life. I won't let you hurt this family anymore." The next few weeks were full of change. David spent some nights at a friend's house, struggling to process his mother's betrayal. Our kids kept asking about their grandmother, and we didn't know how to explain everything. Matthew stayed true to his word. He filed for divorce and got Victoria into therapy. But soon, we discovered her lies went even deeper than we thought. One afternoon, Matthew called me, his voice serious. "Maria, I found something," he said urgently. He had uncovered emails between Victoria and her sister, Sandra. The truth was even worse than we imagined. They planned to use the house money to buy an apartment for David after our divorce, I explained to him when he finally came home. "It's all starting to make sense now," Matthew added, handing over more documents. "And that's not all. She even contacted a lawyer about helping David get full custody of the kids." David sat down heavily on the couch, looking completely drained. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would she do this?" The answer came a week later, during a family therapy session that Victoria's therapist had suggested. Suddenly, Victoria burst out, frustration in her voice. She's not good enough for you. She comes from a middle-class family. She's an orphan, and that's enough, the therapist interrupted firmly. Victoria, we've talked about class prejudice. Victoria's face crumpled, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable. I just wanted the best for my son, she murmured. My mother always told me we had to keep our status, that money should stay in the family. David leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. So you faked having cancer? Just because of social status? The therapy session uncovered years of controlling behavior, deep prejudices, and unspoken fears. Meanwhile, we had another difficult task, explaining to our children why they wouldn't see their grandmother anymore. They had always been so close to her. One evening, Lucille sat on the couch, looking worried. Is Grandma Victoria sick? She asked softly, her big eyes full of concern. David and I exchanged a glance, knowing we had to choose our words carefully. No, sweetheart, I said gently, stroking her hair. Grandma isn't sick, but she is getting help to learn how to make better choices. Lucille frowned, trying to understand. Then, her brother Lucas spoke up. Like when I had to see the school counselor, he asked thoughtfully. After the fight with Jacob, David smiled softly, trying to explain the situation to our kids. Exactly, he said, feeling relieved that they understood. Sometimes adults need help too, to manage their emotions and behaviors. It doesn't mean they're bad people, just that they need a little guidance. We didn't realize how much this situation would affect them, but we were determined to help them through it as best as we could. 6 months had passed since Victoria's lies were uncovered, and things had changed. Matthew had moved into an apartment nearby, looking forward to a fresh start. He was dating again, and although it wasn't perfect, he seemed genuinely happy. Victoria was still in therapy. Her therapist said she was making progress, but we were all still dealing with the damage her actions caused. Victoria's sister, Sandra, had tried to apologize for her part in supporting the lies, but David wasn't ready to forgive her. Then, one day, Victoria asked to meet with us. She showed up at our house with her therapist, and the tension was thick. Victoria's voice was shaky as she spoke, much softer than the manipulative person we knew. I've been working on myself, she said, avoiding our gaze. I know what I did was unforgivable. My need for control and my prejudices nearly destroyed our family. She pulled an envelope from her bag and placed it on the table. These are the documents for a savings account I opened for Lucas and Lucille. It's everything I had saved. I know it won't undo the past, but I want them to have a secure future, free from the burden of my old beliefs. David took the envelope without saying anything, his face unreadable. I could feel how heavy the moment was. Victoria wasn't done. I'd like to see the children, she said, her voice faltering. If you'll allow it, I know it needs to be supervised. Her therapist spoke up calmly. I recommend supervised visits until trust is rebuilt. I looked at David, knowing the decision was mostly his. After everything, it was his trust that had been broken. We can try, David said after a long pause. But it'll take time, Mom. A lot of time. Victoria nodded, tears filling her eyes. I know. I'm willing to wait. I'll do whatever it takes. A year has passed since that meeting. Our family is still healing, but things are better. Victoria continues therapy and sees the children twice a month under supervision. She's trying, and that's all we can ask for right now. Whether she can fix everything is still uncertain, but we're taking it step by step. Matthew has found happiness too. He and his new partner are building a life together, and he seems content. David and I have grown stronger through everything we've faced. Our bond has deepened as we've leaned on each other during tough times. As David says, sometimes it takes a storm to appreciate the calm afterward. The children are doing well. We've taken every chance to teach them about real love, honest love that isn't manipulative. We've taught them that honesty, even when it's hard, is always the best choice. It hasn't been easy, but we're doing our best to raise them with integrity and resilience. As for our home, it's still ours. But it means more now. It represents our strength as a family, our ability to overcome hardship, and the importance of truth, no matter the consequences. Because, in the end, a real home isn't built on lies, it's built on love, honesty, and the willingness to grow together, even through the toughest times. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, like the video and subscribe to our channel. Where justice always finds its way. See you next time.